the person who's playing next what is important for them. And that'll pretty much narrow it down, because you don't want to waste a bunch of time recording extra scratch tracks either. So, figure out what matters and grab those.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. My name is Benedict Hein, and I'm here with my co-host, Malcolm Owen Flood from StoneMastering.com. And instead of asking, how are you, Malcolm? I'm going to ask today, are you prepared for this? Because we'll be discussing something that we already know we might not 100% agree, but that makes it even more interesting. So are you prepared? Are you ready to go through this, Malcolm?
Yeah, I've got my slide cards ready to go. This will be the debate of the year. I'm going to tell you the truth. I have a second Word document, because we have a shared note document, and I have a second one with notes for my argument not shared with you.
That's impressive. So, and as I told Michael before, that I haven't made any notes for this episode because I wanted this to be kind of a discussion, and I have some things prepared as well. But we'll see. So. Yeah, we were talking about pre-production and the importance of it in the last episode. And this episode is the next step. The actual recording is what we're going to talk about. And we are talking about the order of things. So what to start with, what's next, and how you go through the whole process. So maybe the first thing we need to say here is that we're talking about an overdub process, right? So it's not about one recording of the whole band, but if you're doing overdubs, so one,
which is the most common.
Yeah, exactly. So one instrument after the other, then there's an order of it, of course. And people might be wondering what instrument should we record first, and what's next, and what makes sense. And that's what we'll be discussing. So I'll pass the ball to Malcolm, and you start with the first thing here.
Before we jump in, I think I do want to say that, Benny and I do disagree. There isn't a right or wrong. So take it with a grain of salt, and always filter it through your project and think about it. Don't just always do this. And I have my preferred way of doing things, but it definitely doesn't always get done that way. So be ready to adapt to the circumstance, to the song, and just prioritize things as they need to be prioritized. So maybe we'll be able to kind of figure out how to do that as we have our argument here.
Okay.
So the first step really is what we talked about last week, is pre-production. You got to do your demoing. But what that's going to get you is scratch tracks. In most cases, you can just bring those forward from your pre-production demo. But even if not, the very first step is making your scratch tracks. And scratch tracks, for anybody that doesn't know, are kind of performances that are there just to help somebody record to. So let's say the drummer was going to record. It's a lot better for the drummer if they're playing to the guitar and a vocal, for example, rather than just a metronome beeping in their ear annoyingly. What's going to get a more musical performance? Obviously, they're going to kind of play with more emotion if they're actually hearing the core components of the song. So the scratch tracks can be as complete or incomplete as you really want. I would say at least a guitar or main instrument and a vocal would be what I would recommend. But if you want to have more stuff, that's fine as well. But that is really ground zero for me, is making sure there's kind of something there for things to be built on too.
Absolutely agreed, 100% there. I would say, you said if you want to have more, you do more. I agree, but I would be careful doing leads and melodies and solo stuff or whatever, because the rhythm stuff to me is more important in the scratch tracks. And the most important thing is to know where you are at in the song, so that you don't have to think about it and just play to it. And it's important to be able to play super tight to those scratch tracks. And if there is a very loose solo or lead stuff or whatever, that can be a distraction, and it's harder for the drummer or whoever is starting to actually play to the scratch tracks if there's a lot of noodling and a lot of push and pull stuff in there, so I'd be careful with that stuff. But a main guitar, a rhythm guitar, and a vocal is what I would do. The vocal, because it's the emotion, and I think with the vocal it's most obvious where you are in the song actually, so you don't have to think. And the main guitar is just most of the time is the rhythm, the main rhythm element basically. And most songs I guess are written on the guitar, so that is probably an important instrument here.
Yeah, I'm kind of two minds of that. I on one hand I disagree because I think the choices you make are based on what you're hearing. So you might have a chorus where the drummer has gone to the ride, for example, but once more guitars or your synths are in there, it gets washed away and you realize that he should have been playing on the crash or something. So having these extra elements at least available, you don't have to always be monitoring them, but being able to check against the stuff that is meant to be there later on in the process can help make sure that you're making good decisions.
Yeah.
But I do agree with Benny in that part of the job, so for example, 2 episodes ago, we talked about the importance of having a producer on your project, even if that is you. If you're the producer and primary songwriter and recorder or whatever, you could be doing all those jobs. But the part of the job of a producer is to critique the performances that are going down and make sure they're tight and are played really well. And if you have a bunch of tracks, like a bunch of guitars and a bunch of synths and whatever, it gets harder and harder to actually tell what's getting laid down. And if it actually is tight, you might just think, okay, yeah, that sounds pretty good. But then when you remove all of these extra tracks that aren't tight around it that were played to, you might realize it's not as good as you were hoping, or as you thought it was. So really make sure your scratch tracks are in time, like really in time and tight. Even if they're like a little like unemotional, that's probably better in this case. Just like veer on the side of too tight, and make sure things are really in tune as well. Because depending on what instruments you're recording next, you're going to end up using this as a tuning reference, either on purpose or not. So it has to be really in tune and really in time.
Agreed. So main takeaway here is maybe absolutely do scratch tracks, and then have as many of them as you can ready and prepared, but try using only the ones that you really need, basically.
Yeah, to take it a step further, just ask the person who's playing next what is important for them.
Right.
And that'll pretty much narrow it down, because you don't want to waste a bunch of time recording extra scratch tracks either. So, figure out what matters and grab those. So, Benny, what's next for you?
For me, it's drums. And I think that's pretty common. Like the first real thing that you record when it comes time to recording, that it's the drums. And the main reason for me is that I don't know. I think that in modern music, in rock and pop and metal and whatever, like the groove, the drums are the most important part, like maybe after the vocals. In some genres, even more important than the vocal probably. So it just getting that right and getting that foundation, that groove, that's super important for me. And that's the thing that makes your head move when you listen to the song. And that's I don't know, everything else locks into that. Like the guitars and whatever can be a little loose, can be a little laid back or a little rushed or whatever, but I like to have super tight drums, and then everybody else can like play around that sort of, or lock into that sort of. So that's just, I don't know, that's just the first thing I want to have, but never without a scratch track, because the drum tones that I'm dialing in and the way the drummer plays and everything is absolutely like has to fit the song. And if I don't like to create drum sounds or drum performance in a vacuum, I like to do it in context. So I start with the drums, but I want to hear the song while I'm doing it, because otherwise I feel like I can't make a great decision, a great informed decision on bass drum sound or the intensity of the playing and everything. Like if I don't hear the song, like the worst thing was back in the day when I didn't know about all of this, my first couple of projects that I did, we didn't do scratch tracks, we didn't do anything. We just started with the drums, and I didn't even know the songs of the band. So I was listening to drums for days without even knowing what the end result will be or what the song is. Like, how can
Yeah.
you make a great decision that way? But that I made a couple of records that way because I just didn't know. And the band just learned the song so the drummer could play without any scratch track. They just played to the click. And I would hear the song for the first time when all the other people started recording to those drums. And that's a crazy idea to me these days. But I still start with the drums.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. I did that too. It's I think a lot of people make that mistake. So if we can stop anybody from that, we've done our job. That's great.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm with you. Start on drums. Good bands play to drums. The drummer pretty much dictates how good a band is live, and it's the same in the studio, even if you're overdubbing. So in almost all cases, drums go down first for me, after the scratch tracks, of course.
Yeah. So, and now here's the first thing that I want to ask you that is a little unconventional, but I read it and I found it interesting, and I want to hear your thoughts on that. A person that I've been working with, or that I'm currently working with, they recorded drums for their record with me. Now they are recording everything else on their own. Then they will come back for vocals, and then I will mix the record. And we were just chatting, and this person was sending me an interesting article. And it's about a metal band called Trivium. And if you're into metal, you probably know them. It's a pretty famous, pretty well-known big band. And they did their latest record with Josh Wilbur, a pretty legendary producer. And in this interview, they were talking about that they did the drums last for the new record. And Josh Wilbur, the producer, came up with that idea, and he said, or it's something that he does a lot, and he says, yeah, we should, quote unquote, I'm quoting him here, he said, we should do drums last because we're not committed to arrangements and everything like that, but we can record the record, but also if there's something we wanted to kind of change up or do something different. So he says it's easier to rearrange or cut different things with guitars and vocals than drums because of the technicality of the recording, with just the amount of effort it goes into microphones and everything that goes into drums. It's easier to edit and change things on the fly with guitars and stuff than drums. So if there's anything we change, we do the drums last, and we kind of record the drums to whatever we kind of altered or changed if you had to do something during the recording process. So I guess they did pre-pro, but the songs were not really set in stone 100%. They left some of that for the recording on purpose. Mm-hmm. Which can be tricky. And if you listen to the last episode, we talked about why we usually want the songs to be close to finish after pre-pro. But if you're a very experienced band and you know what you're doing, and you purposely, on purpose, leave some of that for the recording process, and if you have a very creative, great producer in the room, or if one of you in the band is that person, the record might benefit from some creativity during the recording. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Or always benefits from creativity, but I mean, from still being able to work on the arrangements. And so they are saying that if you do that, it's easier to change things if you start with guitars rather than drums.
Right. Well, here's the thing. I bet they had programmed drums down that they were playing those guitars to, So they had essentially scratched drum tracks that were perfectly in time, so the drums were kind of recorded first in a way because they would have programmed them first and then played to those. Another band I've heard of that does this is, I think Nickelback is meant to do this as well, where they'll have programmed drums and they'll record the whole album to that. And then at the end of the process, the drummer goes in and tries to beat it. And then they just decide what sounds best for each song. If the human performance beats the superior drummer take, they'll use that, but if not, they'll just keep the superior drummer, and it's cool. But it does give you, it's a cool idea because it gives you a lot of flexibility. You can change the kick pattern if the guitar, you might not notice until the end that things would vibe differently if the kick was synced to the kick to the bass guitar or something.
Yeah,
it does give you a lot of flexibility, but I think that's kind of the same thing in a way. I highly doubt that they just recorded all these guitars without MIDI drums, at least there.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem likely to me.
No. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts without telling you what else is there in this article, because they go on and they say that they did pre-pro and then jammed over those songs, got the tempos, and then went on to recording guitars. So they obviously recorded everything with drums, then recorded the real guitars to that, and then the drums. So of course, as you said, there are some sort of drums in there, and they did the pre-pro just as we were talking about in the last episode. They completely did that, and the songs were probably finished by then. But then during the process, they thought, in case we still wanted to change something, and we have a producer now that's not that, who I think they did 1 day of pre-pro with him, so the producer wasn't involved all the time before that. So they just wanted to give the producer, I guess, the flexibility and the opportunity to change things up. And the best way to do that is to start with guitars because it's easier technically. So I guess if they would have been in the room together with Josh Wilbur for weeks and did pre-pro together, then that step would not be necessary. So in your case, if you're recording at home and can do pre-pro on your own in the same room, you would do that during pre-pro essentially, and then you would start with the drums probably.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so they kind of did the order that we're laying out here, but they did it twice in a way.
Exactly.
They started the loop over.
Exactly. But I just like the thought process like that because it's right. Like if you record real drums, it's a difficult and time-consuming thing, and if you then find that you want to change something, it's hard. So I totally get the idea, and I thought it was interesting. But yeah,
very cool.
All right. So drums. I think we agree on that one. And we start with that.
Definitely. Am I leading the next one?
Yes.
All right. This
Please.
is where we're going to disagree. I'm sure of it. So for my go-to style, I like to do bass after drums. And I know for a fact that Benny likes to do guitars instead. So I'm sure we'll have some conflicting ideas on this. But I think at the end, we're doing it kind of for the same reasons, but we're probably using the instruments in different ways. So I like to do bass because it helps me hone in on the relationship between the rhythm instruments. So the locking of the drums and the bass guitar as a rhythm section. I dig that a lot. And I find that it's easier to keep a bass guitar in tune than a guitar in tune. So for me, it's like this easier thing to get the tuning locked in on because it's one note. They're generally more steady and intonate better than guitars anyways. So I like to start there and kind of build a tone off of the drum kit. The other reason I like it is that I like building my guitar tones off of that bass. Otherwise I find I kind of overdo my guitar tones. I'm trying to make them sound too thick because there's no bass there. But a lot of the aggressiveness of my guitars generally comes from my bass tone. So that's kind of where I'm coming from that. Is one, the relationship between the drummer and the bassist, two, the tuning, and then three is the kind of order in which I'm choosing to build the tones. But let's lay it on me, Benny. What do you think?
Boo. No, you're totally right there. But the funny thing is, I disagree, but for the exact same reasons. So
yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. So to me, I totally see what you're getting at here. But to me, I like to do guitars after drums, and the one reason is tuning. And I agree that a bass is easier to keep in tune and maybe intonates easier because it's like 4 strings and not 6, and you don't play chords and stuff, and it's not as complicated usually. But I'm having a much harder time, or we as humans, I think, have a much harder time to actually perceive the little tiny subtle differences in tuning on a low note compared to a guitar. So when a guitar or one string or one note within a chord is off, I immediately hear that. When I hear a bass and the bassist plays a low E or D or whatever, and it's just a couple of cents up or down, it's very, very hard to hear. And so to me, like the guitar is kind of the tuning reference, and it's if a guitar on its own, it's either in tune or not, and I hear that, and then when I play the bass to it, or the band plays the bass to it, I just know that the bass is in tune or not, because once you play it with the guitar, you hear the difference in those low notes. So I could only think of recording the bass first if there's some sort of tuning reference. So if you program a MIDI bass first, for example, or you have a really in-tune scratch track of a guitar, then I could see that work. And I did that a lot on a lot of records until I switched kind of the order of things. But now I really like to just record the guitars, have the final take, and then do bass. The other reason is also the tone. And I like to craft to get a bass tone after I hear the guitar tone. And I totally see that the bass and the drums have to work together. But to me, it's all about the song and the art and the vibe of the song. And most songs are written on the guitar. At least the bands that I work with, they write their songs on the guitar, not on bass. So the guitar is always, during the writing process, is always what the band focuses on. It's the main thing. And also they have a certain guitar tone in their heads most of the time. Guitarists have a much clearer idea of what they want to have for guitar tone than bassists, often, at least in my experience. So I don't like the idea of compromising the guitar tone because of the bass, but I do it the other way around. So I want the exact guitar tone that the band wants and that fits the song, and I want to hear the main instrument first, and then I kind of fill in the gaps with the bass tone. That's just how I look at it. And also, even if you did pre-pro, sometimes when you're actually recording, you might have missed or overlooked something in pre-pro. And the bass, when you track bass first, you might play a pattern or picking pattern or whatever and just miss a hit or play one more hit or whatever and like just pick a little differently than the guitars. And then when you add the guitar, you either have to adjust the guitar and then compromise the original song and riff because it was actually written on the guitar, or you have to redo the bass if it doesn't fit or if it gets in the way. And if you start with the guitar, you exactly know that this is the song because it was written on the guitar and there's no question. And then the bass player can adapt to if they played it differently before that. So it's just, I don't know. I guess to me, it's just the guitar is more important in most songs, so it comes first. And it's the tuning thing. But I understand your point of view as well, and I think you might end up with a better bass tone if you focus on the drums. I don't know. That's just the way I look at it.
Well, first off, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. No, I'm joking. I'm totally joking. It's like you said, we're agreeing on this for the exact same reasons. We're saying the same things, but just we get there from completely different ways.
Exactly.
Like for tracking bass, I have a tuner, like a visible tuner that I'm literally watching as they're playing the bass to make sure that like we're not drifting, you know? So it's going about the same thing in different ways, and people will find that different things work for them, you know? So you have to experiment and figure out what works. And like I said at the beginning of this, be really adaptable. If I have a band in and I know that the bass player is not on the level that the guitar player's in, and they're just like half the stuff they're playing doesn't make sense to the guitar riff, I'm not going to record them first. Absolutely not. I would definitely get a guitar down and then record the bass to them, because I know that I'm going to have to sit there workshopping their bass parts to fit this guitar riff and the drums. You know, like it all really does depend on the band and the players, and only experience can really get you to that point where you know what to do based on who's in the room with you. But we're both trying to achieve the same thing, and we both get it. Obviously, you know, I've heard your mixes; they sound unreal.
Same.
You know, the bass tone sucks, but no joking.
Well, I could.
I'm totally joking.
I mean, I could say the same about your mixes. So they, as you said, we both get the job done. We both get great results, and so yeah. I totally missed one point here though, and I have to bring it up. And this doesn't have to do like it's another reason for my approach, and I need to bring it up but it has nothing to do with bass or guitar, and still is an argument for guitar first. And that is your vocalist needs to rest. And what I mean by that is I like to have, as early in the process as possible, I like to have a rhythm guitar, because the minimum requirement to be able to sing a vocal to a song, to me in most cases, is drums and a guitar and the rhythm guitar for many vocalists. It's hard to sing to a bass, but you can sing to a rhythm guitar. So, and I don't like the idea of a vocalist having to do all of the record at the end in one like session or multiple days, because you can only really sing for a couple of hours until your voice just is not there anymore. And it's exhausting. It's also psychologically weird. Like if you are in the spotlight for days and everybody's watching you and you have to perform. So I like the idea of getting all the drums done, then getting a rhythm guitar as early as possible, then doing vocals on a song or two, then continuing with some bass, then maybe another guitar, then again some vocals. Like having all the setups there and ready, and then like rotating between those different things. It keeps everybody kind of fresh, and it keeps everything exciting. It's easier for the vocalist. It's a little mindset shift and a little objectivity that you get every time you switch between those things. So that's also an argument for rhythm guitar first for me. And I totally see, and that's probably what many people do, is that you could do that with scratch tracks probably. Like if you have a really
scratch track's good enough.
Yeah.
Right. You definitely have to spend extra time on that scratch track, and sometimes, honestly, it doesn't make sense to spend that much time on your scratch track. If pretty much like if you set up your rig for a scratch guitar and it doesn't sound like even close to what, like it's not worth spending a bunch of time, like a few hours building a tone for your scratch track when it's like you can spend that time later. So sometimes it works out that the scratch track's good enough, and you can get a vocal to that. But if I don't get hung up on it, and I do agree with that. I normally, I guess, on the kind of productions I'm doing, I normally have a couple more instances where, like I would start vocals right after that guitar, do a lead vocal or something, then move to keys, and then hit some harmonies, do some percussion, hit some harmonies. Like I start alternating stuff kind of one step later than you. But you're absolutely right. You have to get vocals started as early in the process as possible. It's kind of like this fine line of, if the song sounds too bare, I don't think the vocalist is going to be into it enough. So I have to like build it up to a certain level.
Yeah.
But yeah, and again, that's the type of thing that's different with every production.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. So how do we continue with this? We could basically skip guitar because basic guitar is like basically one point here, and there's arguments for both approaches, and you can just pick whatever you want to do, or try both and see what works better for you.
Yeah, totally. And like a good rule of thumb is whoever knows the song best. Like if for bands that are new to this and haven't done enough pre-pro, especially, just like somebody's going to really know the songs inside and out, and they should probably get in there first, or at least be present while the other person's recording. That I've had that happen where somebody wasn't able to make it, and then they show up and they're like, "Well, that's not how that goes," and you're like, "Oh, crap."
Yeah.
So yeah, but that really, that's all solved by pre-production. So never mind. And then we also agree. So step 3 and 4 is bass/guitar. Obviously, bass first. I'm joking again. And then it's vocals. We both agree on that. Vocals comes as soon as possible. And then after that, really, I think it stops mattering at that point. You've got a foundation of the song. What's really important is that you just split up the vocals as much as you possibly can, and get everything done. So prioritize what plays the biggest role in the song. If it's an organ heavy song, get an organ in. If it's a piano heavy song, if it's a piano heavy song, get it in before guitars even.
Yeah.
But in general, we're talking about rock productions, really. That's what we do. And it's normally guitars are the focus. So they're going to happen before keys usually. But it stops being pretty, I don't know, to me anyways, it stops mattering after that like core structure is recorded. And then it's just about workflow, what's going to get the job done and keep the session moving, keep the vocalist fresh, keep everybody fresh and excited for that matter. You don't want to focus on like a really boring thing for too long, because people are going to like lose focus on what's important. You want to keep everybody excited. So what do you think about that?
I totally agree. I'd say, as you said, guitar is basically a placeholder, could be replaced with like main rhythm instrument, whatever that is. And could be an organ, could be keys, could be whatever, if in your case. But in rock, it's typically the rhythm guitar. And I agree that from there, like after the vocal comes in, it doesn't matter as much anymore. But in a way, it does, because what I think is important is that you always think about all the like if there are additional elements in the arrangement, like additional keys, synths, post-production elements, samples, whatever, or additional vocals and all that stuff. So there's not a fixed order anymore, but it's always good to like have that stuff on some sheet or somewhere where you can just look at it and go through that and always analyze that and think about what would actually make a difference if we would do it now. And what I mean by that, it's hard to explain, but what I mean by that is there could be a pad, for example, a synth pad in a song that creates a certain atmosphere and vibe. And while it's not super important and you can do it anytime and you can do the vocals first or whatever, if it's in there, it might cause the singer to sing differently because it's all of a sudden there's this atmosphere and vibe in this part and it's just different to sing to that. So it might make sense to do that part before you sing. Or there might be, whatever it is, there might, like, you could, it's good to look at those things not only as additional production that you can do in the end, but some of that stuff might change the way you perform to it. And so always, I like to keep that stuff handy and like to keep that stuff on a sheet or somewhere where I can look at it and then say like, what if we recorded this first? Would this make a difference? Is this important for the vibe of the part? I would look at it like that because sometimes these things can be actually important, and then I would do them first.
That's a great point. The key takeaway there is have a list of everything you plan to record for each song. It should be written down. You should be able to look at it whenever you want really quickly. I would even say like make sure it's on a piece of paper so you don't have to spend time even opening up a document or something. It should just be sitting on a whiteboard, preferably where everybody can see it. That will get things done faster, keep people excited as they see it getting knocked off and checked off. I know we've talked about studio boards before. So definitely do that. But you're absolutely right in that sometimes like a pad, for example, can really set a mood. And, that's going to probably change how somebody writes a guitar solo over it or something like that. Music affects music and it affects our decisions. So definitely do pay attention to that stuff. Another thing to consider is that sometimes you have too many ideas and your song will eventually get full. Like there's only so much space, and what you record first is going to be what ends up staying in most cases, because it gets harder and harder to be objective. So you add an idea, and maybe if the layer under it wasn't there, it would sound good, but because that is already something there, it seems unnecessary, and you're like, let's just not do it.
Yeah.
But if you had thought objectively, okay, which one's actually more important? What is really furthering the end goal and vision that we had in mind in the first place, and get those down first so that the priority pieces are getting the priority space in your arrangement. So knock things off, not necessarily in that order, but get those priority elements highlighted in advance and make sure they're given the time of day that they deserve.
Sure. There's one more thing that I wanted to bring up, and I didn't talk to Malcolm about this before the episode because I wanted to just start another discussion here. And this is, there's not only an order of things for me when it comes to which instrument is first, but there's also an order of which parts you do first within a song, for example, or which type of song you do first. So there's workflow reasons, and there is also creative reasons. So a workflow example could be, you could dial in a tone on your amp that works particularly well for palm mute parts or whatever. So you could go through all the songs and record all the palm mute parts because you're already set up. You are like, your right hand is already warmed up. You're ready to do palm mutes if they're fast or whatever. You can just blast through the whole record and do this part with that tone, and then you switch and do the chord parts or the lead parts or whatever. On the other hand, this could be not a good idea creatively because you kind of skip between songs. You have to switch between different vibes. You're not in the song anymore. So going through one song at a time also has benefits, maybe focusing on that one piece of art rather than skipping through all the different songs. So I'm just curious what your thoughts on this are. And especially, right. I think in a DIY recording environment, in a home studio, it might not be the same as in a big studio, because in a commercial studio, because in a commercial studio, you can set up all these different rigs and leave them there for the entire process, and then switch between and like jump from song to song. But if people record at home, they might only have one or two microphones or one or two inputs on the interface. So constantly changing settings is a big workflow like mess, basically.
Yeah, I really love doing like the stations setup at the big studio where you have like, okay, this is the acoustic guitar world, amps over here in amp corner, drums are ready to go, and being able to like move as inspiration strikes. That's such a fun way to work, but totally not applicable to what we're talking about when we're talking about DIY recording. So with that in mind, I would definitely just do a song by song thing, I think. And there's a few reasons for that. There's like just focus in general, you know, you don't want to like try and like multitask all these songs together and think, okay, where do I have palm mutes and all these other songs? And there's also just like strings expiring, you know? So I think I'm always trying to just get like the song done and focus on that one song. And again, I'm kind of like progress driven by my studio chart on like the board where we've listed all the songs and what we want to record on all of them. So we can just like see the boxes getting checked off the list. But you're right. There's definitely a really cool way inside of those songs for me, because I don't think I really do the jumping from song to song thing. But when you're working on one song and you have that like coarse guitar tone, hit all the courses, hell yeah, and then dial in your verse tone, hit all the verses. You know, it doesn't have to be from start to finish. Same with vocals. You know, get the sung vocals before the screaming vocals, for example, would be a good example of this. So like if that's the verses, you're gonna hit all the verses and then move to the choruses after. So yeah, that's just beneficial on a technical level mostly, I guess. But I think these technical decisions that save us time and energy also free up creative ideas. You know, we have more like mind CPU.
Yeah, exactly. So, but just to see that if I got that right, if you are saying you prefer song by song, but you still do like drums for the whole record and then guitars for the whole record, or is it really like drums for one song, then finish that song, and then drums for the next song?
Generally, well, drums, it's always the whole record pretty well, because generally you don't have like the gear space to leave a whole drum set teched up and good to go. Not normally anyways. So yeah, drums is normally whole record, but bass and guitar, I might jump around, let the bass player do a song, and then grab a rhythm guitar from somebody else. You know, I've got a Kemper that makes that really easy.
Yeah.
You know, like if we're trying to get a lot of stuff done in a short amount of time, like something like a Kemper and a DI is really like what I'll set up. And so that's like one station that covers both of those boxes, you know. And we can just keep people fresh, because even bass, something like bass, a bass player is still going to be totally spent after 4 songs recording in a row. They're going to be wiped. So just like a vocalist, I mean, a vocalist even more so, because they are their instrument. But if you can keep those people fresh, I think it pays off. You can't always do that, and it doesn't always make sense to. But again, it's really on a song by song, project by project basis. Depends who I'm working with, have their attitude. If they need to take a smoke break every hour, you know, I'm not going to make them sit through their smoke break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, what do you do?
Yeah, I kind of switch between things. I agree with drums the whole record. I've always done it that way, and it makes so much sense to me. Again, as I said, I like to do vocals as early as possible, so I'm not gonna record the whole record with guitars, but I'll start with a song and then get the vocals done. Mm-hmm. So that's
a really easy thing to have, like a different setup for. You know, if you have one channel for guitar and one channel for a vocal.
Yeah, exactly.
And a vocal is also really easy to recall. You know, it doesn't take much to get the settings back to the same place. Just make a couple notes.
Exactly. But I would limit it to that I would say I do the guitar for a song, but then do the whole song, and not just do a part and then move to another part of another song, because that way it gets really, as you said, it's like hard to keep track of everything, and you might forget a part, or you constantly have to think, wait, where do we have the palm mute parts and everything? So you're right on that. I don't really do that, but I heard of people do that. So they say like, okay, my right hand is warmed up. I'm now ready to do all the fast palm mute stuff. So we go through the record and do all of that. And that makes sense in a way, but I kind of never do that. But what I do is I'd not say I won't say I never do that. I did that a couple of times, but only then if the performer, the artist, the guitarist or vocalist or whatever, if they tell me that there is a particular part on the record in some song that they are afraid of or scared for whatever reason. Sometimes they just mention that during conversation. I always pay attention to these things because if there is a part that's really hard to do, I keep like a mental note of that or I write it down. And then whenever we do a part that I think would be a great warm-up for that particular part, then I might say, okay, now I think you are really warmed up now. Everything's going great. Why don't we try that tough, challenging thing now? Because I think it could work now. And then we try that, and sometimes that works perfectly. So that's the only exception to that. I just keep a mental note of things like that.
That's a cool idea.
Yeah. I don't know. I'd say what we have to add here is that you should always make presets, templates, and track everything as good as you can. And a preset or something could also be just a picture of the guitar amp. Like what I mean is you should document the tones you're getting, because if you do song by song and you do the whole song, you might come up with a pretty cool rhythm tone and you want to recreate that on another song. And so it would be dumb not to take pictures of the settings on the amp or the pedals or whatever, or save a preset on the amp sim or whatever you're using so you can recall that later. And that way it's not too difficult to just move between different instruments, even if you can't have the amp sit there all the time.
Yeah, totally. Recall sheets are definitely a smart idea. They've saved my butt a couple times for sure. So,
oh yeah,
shit happens. Sometimes you need to redo stuff. So
yeah, sometimes you come up with weird stuff that you just happen to love, and then if you forget to document that, you probably won't be able to recreate that, and you might need it again in another part. And or on another record. Maybe in next record, you remember that one cool thing we did in that part on the last record. We want to do that again here. And now nobody knows what you actually did if you didn't document it.
Yeah. A smart person getting into this game would make a note of everything that makes them go, holy shit, like this sounds awesome. Like down to like a reverb on a vocal, to a delay effect, or a guitar tone or a drum tone. Like just anytime you're like, yes, that's like awesome, better than I expected, make a note of it, because you'll end up in a situation where you don't have that and you'll be like, okay, what was that thing I did? And it just, that's like we talked about even on the last episode, like getting to know these kind of starting points where like I can quickly be like, okay, I know how to get a fat snare drum. Like, and I'm imagining a fat snare drum on this song. I'm going to go to this studio, grab this snare drum and this mic, and I'll be pretty close right away, kind of thing. Like I've got kind of presets in my head for a bunch of these situations, and that's how you get good at this, is you start learning those things about your gear, understanding your gear and what works and what doesn't, and making presets and recall sheets. It will definitely expedite that.
True. Yeah. All right. I think that's it actually for this episode. I mean, there's not much more we could say about that. Important things first.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to mention that when we say like guitars, we mean rhythm guitars first.
Okay.
Leads are always like after, and something I use to break up vocals, because like the lead tone can be totally different than the rhythm tone normally, unless it's a Eddie Van Halen song where it's got to just like be the same guitar on the left.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, leads are the perfect type of thing to break up your vocalist duties.
Especially if it's a solo, because lead can also mean like a melody or harmony over the rhythm guitar and stuff like that. You might want to do that earlier, or it basically doesn't matter as much. But especially if it's solo stuff, like real lead stuff, I kind of think of that stuff as like a replacement of the vocal. So it kind of, when there's no vocal, the lead takes over, sort of. So there's one right. voice, and it could be a lead guitar or it could be a vocal. So it makes total sense to do that during the vocal sessions.
That reminds me, there's actually one additional step that I love to do. It doesn't always happen. The budget doesn't always have, like, it's not always an option, pretty much. And it's not always necessary either. But what I really love to do is, like, a week after you finish cutting the album, come back to it with, like, the main songwriter usually. Like, I kind of find it's like less people is better. But just, like, me and the primary guy or girl, and we sit down, reopen the sessions, and do a listen through and come up with more ideas. It's like you're starting fresh. You've taken a little break. You might, like, half the time it's deleting stuff. It's like, okay, let's try removing some stuff from this verse. It's like I call it the auxiliary day. We just come and finish it. It's like, okay, now the song's done. It's like it's pre-production essentially. It's like, okay, fresh ears on it. We're hearing it for the first time again. And I should mention, when we finish recording, I don't listen to the songs at all for like a week or two, regardless to if we're doing the auxiliary day, because if I'm going to mix, I'll just open up the mix and then start muting stuff, or be like, okay, I'm going to record a tambourine because this song sucks without one. Like I really wish I did that more often, and I wish other people would do that more often. Because at the end of a recording day, especially the end of a recording like week, where you've been cutting your album for like a week, you're exhausted and you've got no more creativity on tap. So coming back for one last little pass of and coming at it fresh and objectively, that's really cool. I think that's everybody would benefit from giving their music one last little brush over after they've rested.
Such a valuable tip here. Yeah, we've all been there. Totally. Sometimes I'd even say to the vocalist, for example, at the end of a session, I'd even say, let's not even think about getting creative now and adding all these, effects that we had in our heads, because I know it won't be as good if we do it now. Let's just save them for another day. Like, I would even do another day or half a day on my time, even if they didn't pay for it, just because I know it's worth doing it and the record will benefit from that. So I even stopped sessions and said, okay, we'll do another day. It won't cost you any extra, just because I know that it will be better for the record if you do it that way. So yeah, totally agreed.
Yeah, well, like it's this weird thing. There's been a couple times where I'm like, okay, let's stop and we'll do it another day, because like if we push forward, yeah, like maybe I'm having to give up free time later, but what we would have accomplished if we had just pushed forward and not stopped would have just had to be redone anyway. So it would have been, garbage.
Yeah.
You're dead on with that.
Okay, so yeah, that's a super valuable tip here in the end again, and I think we can wrap this up. This was great. This was fun, and it goes to show that there is, as often in this whole topic, there is no clear right or wrong. And you just have to find out what works for you, what works for your record. Mm-hmm. But I think there are still some valuable things here that you can use as sort of a template, and then see what you can come up with and what works for you. So it's great to have a starting point like that and just know the why behind what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're having trouble like deciding what to do, like if you're thinking about this for your own project, go to the Self-Recording Band Facebook page community and drop it in there. People would be happy to chime in. You could just throw up a little cell phone demo of the song if you wanted, and people could listen to it and kind of tell you what they think is important. That'd be a great place to start.
Sure, definitely. Go to the selfrecordingband.com/community. That will forward you to this Facebook community, or just search it on Facebook and you'll find it. And love to see you in there. And one last thing, as we're talking about orders here, I have a 10-step guide to successful DIY recording that you can download. If you go to the selfrecordingband.com/10-step guide, you can write it with a number 10 or the letters 10, doesn't matter, both works. So the selfrecordingband.com/10-step guide. And you can download a free PDF there. It's basically a mini ebook thing with 10 steps from writing, arranging, to pre-production, to recording, to file export, everything. And it kind of breaks down the whole process and gives you a clear order of things that you can follow. And it just makes it easier to like grasp the whole process and to really know what to do next and to not lose focus. So download that. Let me know what you think about it. Let me know if it helps you. And I hope this episode was valuable. And
yeah, totally. If you have been listening to this podcast and you haven't checked out the show notes page that Benny writes up for each episode, they're amazing. They're like as valuable as the guides that he gives out. And if you haven't checked out the guides, you got to check those out too. They're like mini ebooks. They're awesome. But head to the show notes. And especially if you're like me and you can't remember these links for more than like 5 seconds, they're always in the show notes. So grab those there.
Like, you're doing a great job, actually, Malcolm, at reminding me of those things. I would have forgotten about all of this if you hadn't said it. So thank you. Yeah, he's totally right. Another link for you, but that's the only one you need to remember, actually, now that Malcolm said this. And it's the selfrecordingband.com/16. So whatever episode you're listening to, it's just the selfrecordingband.com/ and then the number of the episode. And that will take you to the show notes page. And there are the downloads. There are things we talked about. There's a transcript. There is like everything, again, for you to look up and read. If you mentioned a specific software or tool or whatever, it's there. So there are the links if you want to hire Malcolm for a mastering, for example. The link to his mastering studio is there. The link to my mixing service is there. So all of it, all the dozens of links that we mention all the time, they're all there for you. So the selfrecordingband.com/16 in this case.
Awesome. All right, let's wrap it up.
Okay, thank you for listening. See ya.
Thanks, guys. Bye.